died after a military helicopter crashed.
Kenya Airforce aircraft crashed in Boise.
After a Kenya Airforce helicopter, Kenya KDF wamefariki katika ajali ya ndege
baada ya ndege ya wanajeshi hao kuanguka.
The dismal condition that the Kenya Air Force is in today is hardly talked about, given that we pride ourselves on having one of the best defense forces in Africa. It is actually embarrassing when we call ourselves one of the continent's best armies when the Air Force is operating obsolete jets. I'm talking about the Northrop A5 jets procured in 1976 under the government of Kenya's first president. Keep watching this video and I'll show you why the motto "Tuko imara angani" does not live up to the expectation and our skies are not as safe as you may have thought. To say that the Kenya Air Force is in a pathetic condition is a gross understatement. Although we command a larger fleet of aircraft in the region, the majority of the aircraft cannot guarantee air superiority. Most of them are either utility, transport, or trainer planes. Gaining air superiority requires considerably modern fighter jets. This was possible for the Kenya Air Force in the 1970s and in the 1980s, when they dominated the skies in the region. Even in its pristine condition, the F-5 is a rudimentary combat aircraft by current standards. The Air Force is the Achilles heel of the Kenya Defense Forces, and something must be done urgently, given the tense history that the country shares with its neighbors, particularly Uganda and Somalia. And before I continue with this, please hit that subscribe button to get more videos of this sort. And don't forget to like the video too. Now, how did the Kenya Air Force rise to become the best in the region and then fall to become a shadow of its former self? At the height of the Cold War, Kenya was facing serious existential threats from its neighboring countries, which claimed huge chunks of its territories. In the west is Uganda, with a 20,000-strong army under the command of the dictator President Idi Amin, who was adamant that the territory 32 kilometers west of Nairobi belonged to Uganda under former colonial boundaries. At the north is Somalia, which had one of the largest and best equipped armies in Africa. Somalia had set its eyes in more than a third of the northern territory in Kenya, which is inherited by ethnic Somalis. At this period in history, Kenya had one of the smallest armies in Africa, commanding a mere 7,500 personnel. President Kenyatta's administration understood the delicate nature of such claims to the survival of the country, so a solution had to be found. Enters the United States of America. Now, you have to understand that this was a bipolar period in the history of global politics. Governments had to pledge allegiance to either the United States or the Soviet Union. No in between. Kenya was a close ally of the West, and this became an opportune moment to capitalize on this friendship and the desire of the United States to weaken the influence of the Soviet Union. You see, Uganda and Somalia were huge beneficiaries of Soviet foreign policy. Amin's army was well equipped with Soviet tanks, MiG fighter jets, missiles and rockets. Somalia, on the other hand, was armed with Soviet tanks, armored personnel carrier and 50 combat aircraft that it received from the Soviet military. This was a serious geopolitical concern for Washington because the Soviet presence in the Horn of Africa could disrupt oil shipping lanes. So, on June 16, 1976, the United States agreed to sell 12 fighter jets to Kenya in one of the single biggest American arms deal in Africa. In 1978, the United States delivered 10 F-5Es, which are single-seat fighter jet bombers, and 2 F-5Fs, which are two-seat planes that can be used for training. This gave the Kenya Air Force an interceptor capability for the first time in its history. This was a big deal back then, especially when third-generation fighter jets were just being rolled out. It was like buying an iPhone 14 when the iPhone 15 was being launched. It may not have been the latest, but it wasn't far behind in technology. You may think that the future was only going to get brighter. I'm afraid not. That was the height of the golden age of the Kenya Air Force. Everything went on a downward spiral from here. The circumstances that led to the fall of the Kenya Air Force could be construed as a deviation from its primary purpose as well as political turmoil in the country. First, the Kenya Air Force lost its purpose, which it was created, protecting the country from the skies. The Kenya Air Force had now been reduced to be part of the presidential escort. Second, an attempted coup by Air Force officers led to the disbursement of the Kenya Air Force, which relinquished its command to the army. A lot of geopolitical changes had occurred by the time the 12 fighter jets were delivered in 1978. President Amin was facing mutiny from a faction of his army that was loyal to the Vice President, General Mustafa Idris, and Somalia was not interested in another conflict following the end of the Ogaden War in 1977. Without any looming threat from the neighboring countries, the Air Force lost the sense of urgency in preparing for any kind of war. The fall of the Kenya Air Force began when President Moi reduced a world-class fighting force to his personal escort when he left the country and when he returned from international trips. Mesmerized by the VIP fighter jet escort he received when visiting Wharton, Israel in November 13, 1979, the president wanted to recreate the same experience back at home. A tradition began the same year when the Air Force began to escort the president's Boeing 707 plane in and out of Kenyan airspaces. The fighter jets also made a flyby after the president concluded inspecting the Guard of Honor. VIP jet escorts were practical in Israel, which was surrounded by enemies and wanted to protect important people who visited the country. For President Moi, the fighter jet escorts was a flex of his political power, and as you would expect, government critics condemned the wasteful nature of such operations. Furthermore, Air Force pilots and other aviation experts raised concerns about the technicalities associated with flying information with a civilian aircraft. But it was until a botched escort mission in November 26, 1982 that led to a crash of one of the fighter jets that the wasteful tradition came to an end. This was the final straw to the woes of the Kenya Air Force fighter, because earlier the same year, junior officers of the Air Force attempted but failed to overturn Moi's government. The coup left more than 10 soldiers and perhaps 200 civilians dead. Consequently, the Air Force was disbanded, its activity reconstituted, and it was placed under tighter army control as the 82 Air Force. It was not until in 1994 that the Air Force regained its independent status. For 12 years, they were in darkness and became the laughingstock of the armed forces. The Kenya Air Force today needs to rise to the ashes if KDF is interested in maintaining its position among the best. A quick comparison with the neighboring country of Uganda sheds some lights of how far behind the Kenya Air Force has trailed. On record, the Kenya Air Force has 17 fighter jets, which is 7 more than the UPDF Air Force, which commands 10 fighter jets. So this means that the Kenya Air Force dwarfs the UPDF Air Force, right? That's what I thought at first until I dug beneath the surface. Out of the 17 fighter jets that the Kenya Air Force owns, it is reported that only 17 of them are combat ready, as you can see in the satellite picture taken this year. You could have thought that the 7 F-5 fighter jets that were bought from the Jordanian government in 2008 would significantly improve the Kenya Air Force squadron. No, it didn't. In fact, the parliamentary committee that investigated this procurement established that none of the 7 fighter jets could actually fly. So they were cannibalized for spare parts and fed to the already aging fleet. Now we are left with 11 fighter jets for the Kenya Air Force and 10 for the UPDF Air Force. You may now think that with these numbers, the odds are slightly tilted in favor of the Kenyan Air Force. Well, you need to think again, because 5 of the jets owned by the UPDF Air Force are the Russian Sukhoi Su-30 fighter jets. The other 5 are the MiG-21 fighters, which are Soviet equivalent to the F-5 owned by the Kenya Air Force. The Su-30 fighter jets give the UPDF Air Force a massive advantage over the Kenya Air Force, and I can say without any fear of contradiction that these 5 Su-30 fighter jets are enough to completely annihilate the entire Kenya Air Force. I don't want to bore you with the numbers and the specifications here. I'll make another video that compares the Su-30 with the F-5, although in reality, actually there's no comparison. There's obviously one winner, that is the Su-30. Just to show you how modern the Su-30 is, the F-5 fighter jet was made in 1964, while the Su-30 was introduced in 1996. We are talking about a second generation fighter going against a 4.5 generation fighter. There is no contest. But why should you even care about buying expensive war equipment in these harsh economic times? Such a statement is rather naive and undermines the role of peace in economic prosperity. Take a look at a country like Congo, for example. A country with more natural resources than any other country in Africa, yet it still remains among the poorest countries in the world. One major reason why Kenya is the biggest economy in East and Central Africa is because of political stability and limited foreign influence. That being said, the Kenya Air Force significantly needs serious modernization and revitalization for the sake of our national security and economic prosperity. I'm not certain about what the future holds for the Kenya Air Force because we've had moments when the government officials have shown gross incompetence, as well as periods where ambition has been shown. For example, some people in the Department of Defense were actually thinking that it would be a good idea to replace the old F-5 fighters with 12 air tractors AT-802L, which were originally designed to be agricultural aircraft. I don't know what they were smoking over there, but I thank heavens because the 41.8 billion shillings deal never came to fruition. There are also moments of ambition when the government gave us a glimpse of what it would look like if the Kenya Air Force decided to take this modernization thing seriously. In 2020, Kenya received 3 C-27J Spartan military transport aircraft it had ordered back in 2017 for Kenya shillings 23 billion. The Spartan was developed using the engines and systems of the Lockheed Martin C-130J Super Hercules. These airplanes offers the capability to carry up to 60 troops in a high-density configuration and a maximum of 46 paratroopers. In the medical role, 36 stretchers and 6 attendants can be carried. The normal payload is 9 tons, although the maximum payload is more than 10 tons. This purchase shows that Kenya has the capacity to modernize if national security is at the heart of our politics. I'm looking forward to the future and will update you on any interesting developments. Thanks for watching this video, and please, if you haven't subscribed yet, make sure you hit that subscribe button and also don't forget to like this video.